So I want to talk a little bit about lesbians, if you will, and gay men, because again, a lot of the research looks at lesbians and gay men together. And there's kind of a sense we have that lesbians and gay men are sort of mirror opposites. We know who gay men are and we know who lesbians are. In heterosexual couples, there's men and there's women. So we have them kind of pitted against each other. But it is true that lesbians and gay men have been reared with very different rules about gender and very different roles. So, when we think about what it means to date for a young heterosexual woman, actually that's probably a really good example. So you have a 15 or 16-year-old daughter who's heterosexual, who is dating. Generally speaking, most of us, and I don't care if you're in straight homes or gay homes, are trying to protect your daughters because the world is dangerous out there, because men are after one thing, because you want to make sure she's making safe decisions around pregnancy and birth control. What's the message that 15 and 16-year-old boys are getting, heterosexual boys? Go get it. Go get some. Go have fun. I mean, yes, be careful, but very different energy, and for good reasons. There's good reasons to have that different kinds of energy. But the rules about your body, the rules about pleasure, the rules about what it means to say yes or say no, the rules about whether you apologize, whether you understand each other, about who makes the date, who calls, who pays for the date, all of those issues. And being reared in this heterosexual culture, and let's be realistic, all LGBT people have been raised in a heterosexual and heterosexist culture. So it's, even if you knew you were gay before you could walk, you still were raised in a culture and have absorbed all of those values. And the context is the sense of being opposites to one another. The context is that, boys are after one thing, girls have to protect themselves. The context is women have to go get a man to marry her, and the context in the male community is you have to kind of, sort of keep women at bay so they don't trap you. And I know these are extreme social images, but I do think that they exist. And I have to say that in my clinical work with heterosexually identified people, I see that mirrored all the time. I mean, I still speak with women all the time, and not just women of my generation, but women who are 22 and 25 that say, I have sex when my husband wants to, whether or not I want to or not. So I think that these values, I know we all sort of want to be living in a world like this is something that used to happen and it doesn't happen anymore. It is not my clinical experience. So both lesbians and gay men share the same cultural heterosexism and bias, but there are differences. I think that there's a lot more violence directed at gay men for stepping out of what is expected of them from patriarchal roles. So I still think there's a lot of prejudice towards gay men, that lesbians, in an odd way, the invisibility that lesbians have often serve them in a protective way. That, people are less nervous in the neighborhood that the lesbian couple moved in next door than they are that the gay men live next door. There's still more sort of overt prejudice about that. And particularly when we talk about lesbian parenting, even though there's concerns about lesbian parents, they're both still mommies. We even see that in the adoption world, that lots of women who are pregnant, who are looking to place their child for adoption in an open adoption environment, seek out lesbian couples because they see it's sort of like mommy times two. Like, what could possibly be wrong with having two mommies? And they also feel that their children are safe from men. They feel like there won't be sexual abuse, that they don't have to worry about those kinds of pieces. So there's a little more prejudice, I think, around gay men, a little more violence directed at them. But lesbians are kind of stuck. Part of the invisibility is we sort of have the sexualization in the pornography world. There's something hot about two women together. And then we have these sort of good girl images, that she's, they're nice and they're sweet. And, oh, look at those two girls. Are you two girls friends? So again, creates a lot of invisibility. It's important to realize that in some ways, because of our heterosexual upbringing, gay men are more like heterosexual men, and lesbian women are more like heterosexual women, than either of them are like one another. Okay, what I mean by that is that men in our culture have been raised to be men, and they have been raised to be, in a heterosexual relationship, who's supposed to ask who out? Well, men ask women out. And in the gay male community, although people may still be nervous about asking someone for a date, I mean, that's kind of a human experience, I think, there is more social training on how to say, hey, I like you. And I think we have a whole culture in the gay male community where, with looks and, there's sort of a cruising scene that happens that is so not the way dating happens for women, even in lesbian bars, I would say. So, there's the kind of sense of, who's going to ask who out, who's going to start the date, who's going to make the first sexual advance in a relationship. And we have lots of humor in the lesbian community. If you go to see a lesbian comic, a lot of the humor is about this difficulty of doing that. This sort of, you want another cup of tea? You want another cup of tea? Because nobody really knows how to sort of say, okay, let's go for it. So that's just one example. There's many of them, but I think it's really important to understand that our rearing as men and as women really affect how we date and how we create couples. It's also true that there is a fragile alliance between gay men and lesbians. So in many ways, we've worked together historically, politically. Certainly gay marriage has been a place where we've worked together. Certainly around healing from HIV issues, lesbians and gay men have worked together. But the internal structures of the gay male community and of the lesbian community are profoundly different, and how people form relationships and sustain and maintain relationships is also profoundly different. Okay, so lesbians have been raised to be women, to be nurturant, to be intimate, to be relational and connected. So if you think about that, if you think about the sort of classic stereotype of the heterosexual couple where the woman is trying to connect with her husband who's sitting there reading the newspaper, and she's, hey, sweetie, I want to connect, I want to talk, do you want to spend time together? And he's, I'm just happy reading the paper. What happens when you have two women that are both wanting to nest, that are both wanting to connect, that are both wanting to be intimate with each other? So one of the things that we've seen is issues around fusion and merger. So looking at sort of intergenerational Bowenian theory about how couples fuse, and that it seems to be that two women do this more quickly than heterosexual couples do. In some ways, men in a heterosexual relationship take more of that autonomy, more of that distancing. So women have no choice, but they have to respond to that in some way. You can't move too fast or he's going to back away. We have much more images of men running out on marriages, on the wedding rather, than we do women. We don't have too many images of the wedding day has come, the groom is standing there, and the woman doesn't show up. That's not how our culture is made. So the question of two women who get really close to each other, who get really intimate with each other very, very quickly. There's also been a lot of criticism in the literature, and I'll talk more about this theory that sort of pathologizes women's relationships and pathologizes this the intimacy there. Joanne Lulin has rephrased that in a way I really like, that women bond quickly and deeply. So Kate Clinton has humorized that from her famous U-Haul joke. What do lesbians do on the second date? They get a U-Haul. And the reality is, as a member of the lesbian community and as a therapist in the lesbian community, there's a lot of truth to that lesbians bond quickly and deeply. Lesbians on their first date share a lot of information. They connect, they talk, they text, it's very, very, it's all happening very, very, very fast. As a therapist, it scares me. As a therapist, it's like, slow down. You don't really know this person yet. You're just getting to know the person. And so that's the concern. The concern is on this sort of premature fusion. And but the other side of it is that there is this revealing and this intimacy that happens very, very quickly. And note that even butch women often have many female traits. So even though on the surface, their dress style, their hairstyle, their presentation, how they move through the world might be much more masculine, they still identify more with I don't even know if the word is identify with, they respond in their relationships much more relationally, that the need for commitment, the need for intimacy, the need for safety is heightened. Some, I will say some, not all. And I would be remiss without mentioning this issue of lesbian bed death, a term that I think Joanne Lulin is sorry she's ever said out loud. But the idea here is that the idea was proposed, let me put it that way, that lesbians have come into therapy more often than other couples, expressing that they're not having sex anymore, that they're close, they like each other, they don't want to break up, but they're kind of more like sisters than lovers, and how to recreate that. Other therapists, Susanna Iazenza is one, has really criticized that theory and said, as a sex therapist, she does not see lesbians having that issue more than other couples do. I actually side a little bit more with Joanne. I do see lesbians expressing that, certainly more than gay men. Not that I don't see that there, and certainly more than heterosexual couples. So the sort of this question of, at some point, do some lesbian couples get so close to each other that sexuality becomes difficult? In some ways, sexuality is based on a sense of oppositeness, of otherness. In order to have sex with someone, they need to be other than you. One of the examples I often talk about with this has to do with the family wedding, sometimes funeral, that would be kind of a drag, or the bar mitzvah, where the couple lives together, they're kind of not having a lot of sex. They go off to a sister's wedding. They're at the wedding, and they get dressed up, and they're dancing at the wedding, and then they go back to their hotel room, and they're having like mad passionate sex, and they're always saying like, what is it about hotel rooms? And I don't really think it's about hotel rooms. What I think it's about is the getting dressed up part. I think it's about, like, it's a date. It's like, hey babe, you look really nice. So it's not just sort of coming home from work, throwing off your shoes, kind of which again is a different kind of, the ability to sit with someone in your sweatpants and not be dressed up is a kind of intimacy. But it's generally not a kind of intimacy that creates sexuality. So I think that's the struggle there. Okay, so just quickly, because gay men is not my topic, but gay men have been taught to be more contained, more distant, more non-emotional, to place work over relationships and sex over intimacy. And again, men, not gay men, men have been taught that. So when you have two men together who have been taught to be more contained, more distant, more non-emotional, to place work over relationships and sex over intimacy, I think it's pretty clear that some of the dynamics, and again, I see this a lot. If I was a stand-up comedian, there's a lot of stuff here for humor. The gay male couple that's been together for 10 years that don't live together yet. And I want to be clear, I'm not judging that. I'm not saying they should or they shouldn't. But it's much more rare to find a lesbian couple that's been together for 10 weeks that aren't talking about not being together. I think those dynamics exist. Despite social stereotypes, the gay male world is a very male world. It's a world about, men work out, men want to look masculine, men want to act masculine. The pre-AIDS community was a highly sexualized community. And I think, this is probably one of those places for me in my journey in the last 35 years as both a member of the LGBT community, but also as a therapist, is understanding the way sexuality is for gay men. And again, when you say sentences like that, for some gay men, not for all gay men. But I often share a story of being in a car with a gay male friend of mine. Happened to be a therapist. I don't know if that matters for the story. And we're talking. We're driving down the highway. We're talking. And all of a sudden I notice he's really distracted, but I'm driving, so I'm like trying to figure out what's going on. And I suddenly realize he's having this flirtation with this guy in the next car. Like, we're on the highway. We're like driving on the highway, and he's having a flirtation with a guy in the next car. Like, I cannot imagine that kind of dynamic taking place between two women in the same kind of way. And when I say I can't imagine it, I can imagine it, but I would not see it as common to happen. So So the context of how sex is played out, of how sexuality is played out, and of course, I'm not saying that all gay men are out, having sex all over the place. There's lots and lots of gay men that are in very, very long-term relationships, and it's also true that there are many gay men, and we have really good research on this, that are in long-term, satisfying, healthy relationships that are also open to having other sexual partners, and the research has shown that that is not true for the majority of lesbian couples. Okay, so this slide always annoys me that I feel like I have to say it, but I feel like I have to say it, so I do. But I'm looking forward to the day when I don't feel like I have to say this slide. So lesbians and gay male relationships involve the same dynamics and values as heterosexual relationships. I mean, in the most basic way, what's a relationship? What are you looking for? You're looking for closeness, you're looking for intimacy, you're looking for commitment, you're looking for someone to come home to, you're looking for someone who will love you, quote unquote, unconditionally. The most common denominator in romantic relationships is love. The short version of this talk is gay couples, lesbian couples love each other in the same ways that straight couples do, and they argue in the same way that straight couples do, and they disagree, and they struggle with loneliness, and they struggle with wanting more from the relationship, and they struggle with infidelity, and they struggle with, you don't look the same way you did 20 years ago, and I'm having trouble feeling sexually turned on to you. They struggle with every issue that that straight couples struggle with. But they do that in the face of a whole bunch of complicated social and political dynamics. So they need to negotiate the same developmental issues. What if I like you more than you like me? When should I tell you I love you? What if I say I love you and now you're going to run away from me because I just said I love you? They struggle with all of those issues. But they do this while living in a very oppressive culture. And because they often, depending on where you live, don't have the same legal protections, they do it in a way that there is a lack of external security that protects their relationship. So what happens is people have to create an internal system of security, which sometimes can foster more jealousy, can sometimes foster more fear, because the outside world may not even know that you're a couple, depending again on where you live. Or, probably the best example of that, and I have heard this story 100 times, that the lesbian saw her old friend, or she went over to hang out with some people, or she saw her aunt, and somebody said, "Are you still with so-and-so?" The couple that's been together for 20 years. Are you still with them? In a way I cannot imagine people saying, even to the heterosexual couple who you're thinking like, I don't know why the hell you're with that person anymore, the couple that's the volatile, awful marriage. We would never use language like that. We would never walk up and say, are you still with them? So there's a sense that the external boundary around the relationship is a little looser.